Good crowd. Thank you all for attending. I got to say there were a couple sleepless nights. I didn't want to get all these folks together for this panel and not have anybody show up, and I did worry about that. So thank you all for attending today. I trust you'll find today's presentation both informative, enlightening, and I think we're going to have fun too. I know a lot of us know each other and know these folks, so it'll be informal, but it'll be very informing. I'm Patrick Weddle, and most people know me as Nancy's husband. I want to thank her for inspiring me to do this program today. Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge some very special guests. And did Brooke Lane show up today? Did Brooke get here? Hi, Brooke. Supervisor Lane from District 5 Tahoe. Thank you very much for attending. The supervisors today had a special meeting for John Heidel. It was a memorial and a tribute to him, and it was excellent. It was very well done and a great community turnout. Thank you for that, Brooke. Also, former Supervisor Michael Rinaldi. Hi, Michael. Thanks for attending. Also an agriculturalist in El Dorado County. Were there any other supervisors here? Okay, didn't want to miss anybody. In the early 1960s, a disastrous disease, pear decline, vectored by a small plant-sucking insect, devastated El Dorado County's primary crop, the Bartlett pear. Within one season, healthy, productive pear trees were dead. It was an economic catastrophe for the many small farm families in the county. You will hear more about that today, and you will learn of the agricultural renaissance that occurred in the wake of that disaster. Our group of distinguished agriculturalists will be presenting their stories, and like all stories, not only will they be talking about the facts of this history, but the humanity of the history as well. Keep this going. A few months back, I was going through my library in an effort to get rid of some old books and publications when I came across the Pear Pest Management Manual. This was a product of the agricultural renaissance that I was talking about. It occurred to me in hindsight how exceptional that publication was for its time. The manual was the very first of its kind and resulted from a group of UC, University of California Extension agents and growers, led by our then UC farm advisor, Dick Bethel, in response to the ever-increasing reliance on costly, highly toxic, and environmentally damaging pesticides. Those pesticides were being used extensively throughout the pear and apple industry, not only in El Dorado County, but in many other places in the state and country. As the pear industry recovered from pear decline, pear growers were spending over $600 an acre on pesticides in 1978 dollars. Simultaneously, the science of integrated pest management to counter the problems associated with these risky pesticides was emerging. Randy Hansen and I were two among a number of young agriculturalists that were recruited by Dick Bethel and Ed Delfino to El Dorado County at the time. As young, newly graduated and resident entomologists specializing in IPM and working for the university, Dick enlisted Randy and myself in the development of this manual. Now, over the years, Randy and I worked as agricultural consultants in many countries, and wherever we went, we would find this manual on the desks of people that we were working with. Because of the success of the pear manual, University of California at Davis developed an entire publishing division to produce and sell many other such manuals. In addition, other universities around the country and the world opened up the same kinds of publications. It all began in El Dorado County. You will hear more about Dick and Edio today. You will also hear about other pioneering efforts that originated in El Dorado County, and you will hear stories of about those Renaissance pioneers. Finally, you will learn some about the economics of agriculture, learn of the current status and future challenges facing the industry. Today, we have a distinguished panel of modern agriculturalists, the legacy of some of those pioneers. They represent a significant cross-section of the county's agriculture, but certainly not all of it. In time, if time and logistics were not limiting, there would be many other farmers and ranchers that could tell their stories as well. But we are constrained, so the emphasis today will be on tree crops and vines. Now, tree crops and vine crops aren't necessarily staples of the human diet, but as it says in the Bible, man does not live by bread alone. Perhaps another day we can visit the forest products, the Christmas trees, animal husbandry, and ranching, other significant components of our agricultural industry. So with that, I'd like to introduce our panel. They'll be coming up here one at a time and giving their presentations. But we have Justin Boeger. All of you are familiar with Justin and his family, Boeger Winery. Paul Bush, Madroña and Rucksack Wineries. Leeann Mila is our County Agricultural Commissioner. Dave Bolster is an ag real estate specialist, member of El Dorado County Agricultural Commission and farmer. And then finally, Chuck Mansfield, Goldbud Farms, and newly elected EID director and member of the El Dorado County Agricultural Commission. So with that, I'd like to invite Justin to come up and tell your story, Justin.
Thanks for having me. I guess I'm going to tell my dad's story because I'm filling in for him today, filling his shoes. He's been in the hospital for the past week or so with he had some heart failure and AFib, but it looks like it's under control now, so he should be back home tomorrow, hopefully. I tried to convince him to just zoom in and give the presentation himself, but he felt he should. Actually, he was really tempted to. It was probably my mom who talked him out of it. So I'm going to do the best I can, and this presentation is largely stuff that I've learned from him over the hundreds of times we do tours at the winery. We always talk about the history of El Dorado, and so I'll start on that, and let me see if I can figure out the technology here. That should be a good thing for me. All right, so that's our first slide there. So there is a long history of agriculture in El Dorado. Of course, it didn't, by the time we get to the pear decline in the 60s, there was a lot of agriculture going on before that. So in particular, I'm with the winery, so I'll be talking a little bit about grapes, but the wine history in El Dorado County starts from all the way back to the gold rush. The first significant plantings came after James Marshall's discovery of gold at Sutter's Mill in Coloma, of course. With that, there was a huge influx of people. Large proportion of those immigrants were from Mediterranean countries for whom wine was just an integral part of their culture and everyday life. You know, wine was just something you had on the table with your meal, which is how I look at wine also. I try to encourage all my friends to look at that. Don't just save it for a special day. Especially now that the wine industry is suffering, you know, keeping it as a regular part of the diet's great. Anyways, this isn't a marketing event, so let me get back to the history. A lot of people who came here, though, quickly learned that the real riches of the gold rush weren't to be found in the creeks and streams, but really in the sales of goods and services to the miners. There were so many miners, and they learned that, you know, if you had a hardware store, you were selling to the miners. Well, wine was a natural good product to be selling to the miners. I always like to say, you know, the miners are either striking it rich and they wanted to celebrate, or they're losing their shirts and needed to drown their sorrows. Wine was a good commodity to be dealing in. And this is Skinner Winery in Rescue. The Skinner family, they were early producers and one of ultimately 60 wineries that were in the county by the end of the 19th century. So we had started off with just a few vineyards around Coloma and grew into a large wine producing region in California. In fact, by the late 1800s, El Dorado County was actually the third largest wine and wine grape producing county in the state. That was after Los Angeles, mostly because Los Angeles was a huge population center, and Sonoma counties. El Dorado County's production went mostly to locals and miners. Well, and of course it went to locals and miners, but it was also shipped in large quantities to Nevada mining towns like Virginia City. Those miners wanted there, and the supporting population wanted wine as well. Then starting in the early 1900s, though, as you'll see up here, there's let's see, this is the pointer, there we go. In 1904, we had 2,100 acres, and by 1910, we went down to 580 acres in the county. That decline was due to, I mean, it was not really a decline, it's actually went off a cliff. That was due in large part to just general economic decline. Population was declining. It was partly the latent effects of the 1884 Sawyer Act, which is what outlawed hydraulic mining because it was polluting up the streams and rivers, was going down to Sacramento, silting up the Sacramento and American rivers. And of course, that was the main method of gold extraction up here in El Dorado, because everything was in the uplifted stream beds, and so you've got placer gold on the hilltops. It's easier to just wash it down than dig it out. So and in fact, so with that decline in the mining, the support industry started declining, population declined. The El Dorado County population declined from a high of about 40,000 in 1852 down to just about 6,400 in 1920. That is according to the, where did I get that? Well, I'll cite it afterwards if you want. I can't, the print's too small. But I didn't just pull that number out of my hat. Oh, there we go, Pat, thanks. Oh, there, that's even better, okay. So then, of course, then there was also Prohibition came around in 1919, but ironically, that actually helped stabilize the decline in grapes. And that's due to the fact that there was a personal use exemption and a religious exemption for wine or alcohol. So the growers up here that were still growing were shipping their grapes across the country for home winemakers, and also to the churches for religious purposes. So you'll see during the 20s, well, from 1910 through 1930, the acreage hardly changed at all. And then even more ironically is that after the repeal of Prohibition in 1933, you can see that the grape acreage drastically started reducing again. And we think that that is due to the fact that once wine became legal to produce and consume, that there was every county, just the wineries popped up everywhere. Wine was commercially available. With all the additional production, there was downward pressure on prices, and the El Dorado County wineries, the ones that were here, just couldn't compete, and so they stopped producing. And you can see by 1966, we were down to 11 acres. So with agriculture having always been a principal economic driver in the county, something had to be done to replace the grape industry. And as Pat alluded to, that was pears. And I do not know much of the history about the pears. Someone else will talk more about pears in Apple Hill, but pears were what replaced it. So we chose pears, and my understanding, and maybe someone will correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe El Dorado became one of the largest pear-producing counties in the state as well. And that might just well be a testament to just how good our soils are up here. There's a reason that grapes thrived and a reason that pears thrived in our current agriculture as well. At the peak of our pear production, there were over 60 packing sheds in the county. That source for that is my father, so I don't have the fact check on that. So then in 58, it's another pear orchard. We did face the disease known as pear decline that Pat alluded to. The parasite spreads it from tree to tree. And my understanding is in the worst case, the trees can die within a few weeks in the fastest case. And I think Pat alluded that within a year, half the county was down or something. The production was down. And that's what my dad said here. What do you know? Pear aligns with you. So production declined by 50% in a single year. So this is Dick Bethel and Ed Delfino. We'll hear a lot about them today. So again, we had to pivot. And these two people, Dick and Ed, were really instrumental in the county's ag industry surviving the most recent threat, not the prohibition and decline of the economy, but the decline to the ag industry because of the pear decline. As luck would have it, Ed Delfino had a family history in Napa Valley wine grapes, so some part of his family, and I don't know all the history of that, but he had some background in wine grapes. So that was already in his mind. And they had both recently come into their positions, I believe, here in the county. They were concerned about how Placer County, which was suffering similar threats to agriculture, because I believe there was a lot of pears in Placer as well. But in Placer, they were losing their prime ag land to other purposes and uses. So they wanted to come together and devise a plan to save the ag industry in El Dorado. So they helped, what they came to decide to do was they helped to implement the development of experimental wine grape vineyards. Some of those vineyards went in. Lloyd Walker was a grower. Ed Delfino and Dick Bethel themselves did it. John Hemp down in Gold Hill and Vern Gerwer. The grapes from the vineyards were then sent to UC Davis to make wine and to have the wine evaluated. And the results were fabulous. They were said to have phenomenal potential. And so this is an article that came out in the Sacramento Bee around 1970 or so, or early 70s. And talking about the results of these experimental grapes having been sent to UC Davis. And coincidentally, at this time, my dad had just graduated UC Davis in 1968. He had a degree in international ag development with an ag econ and viticultural specialty, so he was already sort of interested in wine grapes. He had worked for the federal government. He was at the time working for the federal government doing actually doing the grape crush report. So even more, he was already leaning towards grapes. And then he saw this, doing the grape report made him feel nostalgic about time he'd spent growing up with his grandfather who had a winery in Napa Valley. And this all was coinciding with the rebirth of the wine industry as a whole. So Napa was really roaring back. The wine industry was up and coming. Even then, land in Napa was pretty expensive if you wanted grapes. So at this time, my dad was already looking at making a change out of the federal government because he was a third-generation Californian and was worried about having to move with his job out of state. And then he saw this article and saw Ed Delfino's name in there, so he called up Ed Delfino and wanted to see if he could meet and explore the potential of grapes in El Dorado County. This, my dad wanted me to throw in here. This is his family in Napa. It's my great-grandfather and great-grandmother and their 12 children. The youngest, Inez, was my grandmother, so my dad was the son of the youngest child of the family. This is his great-grandfather my great-grandfather in Napa Valley, in the Childs Valley, a sub-appellation. And here this is a picture of him. This, you'll notice down in the date, is 1928, so this is the middle of Prohibition. He was growing wine grapes for outside uses, of course. It all went out of state. You can see how overcropped the vine is, but he's really proud of it. And my dad likes to say, if you look at the prior photo, that's a huge crop there and a huge crop here. Both of them are prime examples of beings that are overbearing in their species. So my dad made me include that, but I have lots of dad jokes I tell at home that my kids hate, so I got to get a few in here. So my dad, after talking to Ed Delfino and Dick Bethel, they started touring a lot of properties up here. And after looking at them all, they landed on this property. This was the Fossati Lombardo. At the time, it was a pear orchard. It had historically been a winery. It had so far escaped pear decline at that time. And so we sat down, and my dad ended up purchasing that, or my parents ended up purchasing that property, because as later I learned, my mom is the one who controls all the money, because otherwise we wouldn't have any money. So we did purchase this property in 1972. We bought it from the grandson of the baby in the photo there. So it was a fifth generation of the Fossatis and Lombardos that were there. And that is the wine cellar and residence. So that was in 1972. That's the same property, the same building, winery downstairs, resident upstairs, short walk to get your wine. That's the property today. And when Dad bought it, decided to keep producing the pears, and then we brushed over land to plant grapes. For the first years, I'm getting ahead here. Okay. We didn't have any vineyards yet, so we were planting vineyards. My dad had met John Hempt, one of the growers of one of the experimental vineyards down in Gold Hill. John didn't want to produce wine, and so we leased his vineyard and property there to make our first vintages. So while our grapes were being planted and growing for their first production, we were crushing grapes at what is now Gold Hill Winery from the vineyards there. At about that same time, Dick and Leslie Bush, now of Madroña, Paul's going to talk about other things, but they were exploring starting a vineyard too. So Ed Delfino introduced them to my parents, and they all sat together on the balcony of that old house right up there, having wine and talking about the future of grapes and wine in El Dorado County. I suspect they must have had a really good time because they both decided to proceed investing in vineyards and wineries. This is opening day in 1974. So soon afterwards, after that meeting with the Bushes and my parents, a lot of the other wineries started coming in, the McCrady's of Sierra Vista, Mick McGuire of El Dorado, the Joneses of Lava Cap, Les Russell of Granite Springs, Brian Fitzpatrick, to name just a few. Those were some of the early ones that started around the same time as we did, and then came the flood of wineries that there are today, especially through the 90s. The acreage really exploded. This is our current producing vineyards. So we went up to, well, we'll get to that. So Ed Delfino then further went on to protect ag land by developing minimum parcel sizes to protect agricultural land with setbacks to avoid conflict with incompatible uses. Ron Mansfield, of course, we may hear about as well. He with Goldbud Farms, he was really instrumental in helping the new vineyards get established. I know between Ron and one of my parents my dad has always been super generous, and it's a good thing my mom was there because he would give everything away, all of his knowledge, everything. My mom was there to make sure that in the important cases we were properly compensated for what he wanted to give away. But if it wasn't for my dad and people like Ron and actually all the other growers up here, we all are a big family of help each other out and help. We realize the rising tide floats all ships. So if we didn't have all that help, we wouldn't be where we are today. And just to bring it all back full circle, with the wine industry at least, we're back up to about 2,200 acres. That was on one of the other, that was in a number of years ago. Over 60 wineries. And to top it all off, one of the region's newest wineries, of course, is Edio Vineyards. That's the Delfino family. It's Ed Delfino's grandchildren running that. So I always thought it was kind of neat that Ed, if it wasn't for Ed Delfino helping to convince my dad to start up here, to start our winery up here, and now the newest one is Ed Delfino's grandchildren's winery. So that is all I have for my presentation. So thank you.
Thank you, Justin. That was great. Wonderful job. There's your phone. Yeah. Okay, good. I neglected to say that what we're going to do is we're going to go through the presentations first. Then we're going to take a brief break, and we're going to set up here as a panel and have question answers and discussion after the formal presentations. So hold your questions until then, please. Next up is Dave Bolster. Dave, I knew his dad. I worked with his dad when I first came up here. Dave grew up in Apple Hill. He knows the history of Apple Hill. His dad was one of the people that started Apple Hill. So Dave, please.
Thank you very much, Pat. I was misinformed. I thought I was talking to a 4-H group today, but we're a little older. Good afternoon, everyone, and it's always a great pleasure to talk about Apple Hill. And first, shout out to the Boeger family, the Bush family. We all take it for granted now, this wonderful wine industry they have today, the Apple Hill program we have today, but it took pioneers to do it. And the Boeger family particularly, and then the Bushes following that, put ourselves in that position. In 1972, there were, 20 acres of wine grapes in the county. Greg and Sue came up, and with the encouragement of the farm advisor and the ag commissioner, took a great leap of faith. There was zero evidence to show that investing the kind of money they did in a winery in El Dorado was going to work, and it did, and that's That's entrepreneurship, risk-taking entrepreneurship, which thank you to the Boegers and the Bush family. So always a pleasure to talk about Apple Hill. It's basically a story. It's a Phoenix story, like Pat mentioned, of rising from the ashes of disaster, both the pear industry and the apple industry as well. And it's a great story, and given the characters involved, the founders involved, I can't tell all the story. Between Ed and Dick and my father and Bob Tuck, a lot of great stories, and some of them aren't G-rated. So, but great stuff nonetheless. So as Pat mentioned, I grew up with the Apple Hill world. My folks had moved up in December of '57, and in El Dorado County at that time, there were no hospitals. There was the sanatorium. So I was coming along. They had to wait for me to come along the 1st of October, and then they moved up a month later. So growing up in the business, some of my talk, I need the Ag Commissioner and pest management people, and also if there's anybody from the environmental management world, you have to close your ears. So we had, my dad took some great home movies of some of the Apple Hill story and also our farm operation back in the day. Back until 1972, the Apple Hill area, we had a crop duster come in early September. The crop duster would come in and spray most of the orchards in the area with stop drop, a material called naphthalene acetic acid. So my dad's got some great video of the Stearman biplane coming right in over the house and spraying everything and everybody, including, unfortunately, a school bus. And that was the end of the crop duster program. But to tell you that times have changed, in the early September of 1972, my dad said, hey, boys, I think we were 12 or 13 or whatever. My dad said, hey, the crop duster owner guy just got here. The plane's on the way. The flagger is sick today, so you boys are going to be the flaggers. So my brother and I go out in our t-shirt and our protective equipment called the Giants baseball hat, and the gentleman says, okay, you boys start in that row there and skip a row with the flag and keep going. So the crop duster comes in and literally 10, 15 feet above the top of the trees, and we're getting plastered with naphthalene acetic acid. And so every time I have an argument with my wife, I tell her the crop duster story. I say, dear, it's not my fault. So you pest management guys. So let's talk about Apple Hill. Right one. I'm a farmer, so I have to be taught. Okay, so we've talked about some of our great pioneers and some of the people that made great contributions in El Dorado County. Ed Delfino became the Ag Commissioner in 1960. Dick Bethel, I think that was the same year, he became the farm advisor. Dick always joked that when Ed arrived, he brought pear decline with him, and the pear industry collapsed after that. But what I want to point out here, this is Ed's crop report for 1961, vital link to El Dorado County economy. So back in the early 1960s, we were thinking about agriculture as an economic development project. So good job, Ed. This is Ed's letter to the Board of Supervisors, and here's the basically the summary of the problem. In 1958, El Dorado harvested 52,000 tons of pears, and by 1963 it was down to 11,000 tons. So almost overnight the industry collapsed. So that coincided with, so here again, Ed Delfino, a little bit of propaganda. El Dorado ag industry is the foundation of all El Dorado. And once again, statistics telling what the problem was. So the other issue we had was, believe it or not, back in the day there were 440 acres of apples, and my folks were apple growers at the time. We had about 20 acres of apples, and there was only, we talk about a marketing program like Apple Hill. There was no marketing program. It was haul your fruit down to the Placerville Fruit Growers Association and hope they could sell the fruit. And you know, you were going up against the state of Washington in the wholesale market. My dad always joked that most years he'd haul 20 acres of apples down to Placerville fruit growers, and he'd get a bill at the end of the year and not a check. So that was for the Apple Hill, or the apple grower side of it. That was a crisis as well. So it all began at Bob Tuck's place, and again, knowing the characters, it began with a group of farmers having an afternoon toddy at Bob Tuck's place. Again, shocking that the 4 founders were involved with drinking to get the project going. So basically, that was the genesis of it. Bob Tuck, who's a retired college math professor, Duke Bethel farm advisor, Edio, and my dad, who's an Aerojet engineer, they all got together and said, "Hey, we're either going to lose the industry, and this is going to be one big giant subdivision up here, or we better look at options." And so my folks, being from Southern California, had visited a place called Oak Glen up in Yucaipa, and they had 15 to 20 farm operations down there, and other people, I think the Thomases, had been there. So the idea was that let's go down and look at Oak Glen and use that potentially as a model to what we could do up here. So Ed Delfino and my dad were tasked to go down and visit Oak Glen in Yucaipa. And my dad has the old home movies, and I was going to give them to Leeann so we could play them, but unfortunately it's family movies with me jumping around at 5 years old on Christmas, so not what everybody wants to see. So, okay, so drive up to Oak Glen, the Ag Commissioner and my dad go to Oak Glen, check out the operations, and my poor dad, so he was an engineer and a pack rat, so I have all of a very big and large file, the original articles from 1963, which we'll show you here a little bit. So I'm guessing that my dad, in fall of 1963, never imagined I'd be standing up here showing his handwriting over there that says plagiarism. So ideas and plagiarism. So basically they took notes on the Oak Glen marketing program. Today we call it modeling. So they used Oak Glen as the model. Basically, they came back up in the early winter of '64. My dad showed the home movies, The Power of Film, and visiting all the farms, cider mills, bake shops, and Ed and my dad said, "We can do this, guys." So again, a contribution of the Ag Commissioner's Office and the Farm Advisor's Office. This is a response. One of the questions was, back in 1964, can Apple Hill use the term association, which was a legal question. And so the response of the Secretary of Agriculture, Ed Delfino, basically was, yes, you can do that. So just an illustration that they had to start from ground zero and figure it all out at the time. So this is communication from the President of the California Apple Growers Association. And I think one of the illustrations of what it took, and it's kind of funny reading through all of the publications and the meeting notes and all the correspondence. They called it the Apple Hill Project because it didn't exist yet. So they had to create an Apple Hill Project. And so this is a letter from their president informing my dad that, yes, we have the agricultural editor of the McClatchy newspaper, and also the gentleman from the University of California Cooperative Extension Service, their news director, and that was coordinated by Dick Bethel, to bring them up. So this was in August of '64, and so shortly after that, this is the first media exposure that Apple Hill got. And the gentleman, Henry Schacht, subsequently also wrote an article that we'll see here shortly. So this was the first article, Sacramento Bee, in September of 1964. The gentleman on the left is the president of the State Apple Growers Association. Next is Ed Delfino, Ag Commissioner. I was going to say Dick Bush, but our neighbors, the Bushes, Grandpa Celler. They were the owners of Grandpa Celler. And my dad's on the right in his skinny little Aerojet tie. So that was the first exposure, the first sign that Apple Hill created. That's my dad and Carl Wiesman on the left. My dad was the president, the first president. And so when you create an organization, you have to start marketing. So the first marketing material, and unfortunately, a lot of us in the room remember that a lot of people had trash bags hanging from their radio dial. And so the first marketing collateral association was a trash bag. And all these little dots here are the locations of the farms. And so each farm handed out the map. And the idea being, it says, I'm a litter bag, put me in your car. So that was the marketing campaign in early 64. This is Henry Schacht. He wrote this article for the San Francisco Chronicle. He came up and with Dick Bethel, my dad, took a tour of the area. And as you can see, there was some skepticism that it was going to work. And so obviously entitled The Brave Try of Apple Hill. And the bottom of it is there's no guarantee that this small plucky band of growers is going to be successful, but we think they have a good start. So, again, just a good indication that the outcome was not guaranteed and they didn't know it was going to work. I think this is an illustration again of sometimes it takes luck. The Communal Cable and Northern Railroad started in the same year Apple Hill started, 1964, which was a great boost to Apple Hill. Obviously a strong tourist attraction that went from downtown Camino over to the intersection of Cable and Larson. Some of our neighbors bike by that every day, the sheds and so forth. So it was luck that railroad, narrow gauge railroad started. They hauled about 5,000 people the first year, and it grew. And the railroad survived from 64 till about 77. You can't see it here, but in the the back, what's that back thing called? Caboose. So the train went past our property, and at the edge of the railroad tracks, our property went up to the tracks, and my dad thought, oh, shoot, if the train's going by, well, that's where our picnic area is going to be. So knowing he had 4 sons and daughters, we put up a stand, apples, cider, and my dad said, you boys and girls, they're going to stop here, they're going to get off the train, they're going to picnic, and you sell them apples and cider. Which lasted for about an hour and a half. My brother and I, we were smart enough to become pals with the conductor, and so we spent probably half our weekends riding back and forth in the upper part of the caboose up there, which was a pretty good way to grow up. It was a hoot. So we got lucky. The train started that year. This is a letter from Dick Bethel. And so Dick's role really with the start of Apple Hill was less as a horticultural advisor than it was as the chief marketing director. Dick was all about the marketing. Obviously had a good deal of help from University of California Cooperative Extension Service. So basically he was saying, growers, we have a marketing problem, and this was in, 65? February of 65. So they had launched the program, they'd gotten some traction, the public came up, and in 1965, Dick said, we got a marketing problem, folks. How do we get more people up here? So Dick hosted a marketing panel and put in some great people. And so that was really Dick's role, and he did a great job of that. As you can see, this is a letter from Dick Bethel to my dad and Dick Bethel, Bob Tuck. one of the proposals was, let's go engage a marketing firm. And the and the proposal came back at $5,000, and this is in February of 1965, so 5,000 is 50,000 today, whatever that number might be. And of course, they couldn't afford that. And my dad came back and wrote the gentleman a letter, said, how about 2,500? And the guy wrote a letter back, and it's in here. Oh, here it is. And Gene's acquaintance and all done at that price quoted. I'm sure he could have produced Cleopatra for under 50,000. Cleopatra was obviously the movie that was introduced or released in 1963. So they couldn't do it for 50,000, and it turns out they really couldn't do it for 2,500 either. They honestly didn't have a nickel to their name. So, and here was the second breakdown to get them to 2,500, which they didn't have. So they pivoted from there of being broke to a strategy of media relations, and I shouldn't use the term selling, but promoting Apple Hill as a media darling and as a community resource. And so that was the first year we did our press picnic, the media picnic. And it turned out to be a great success because we forged relationships with much of the Northern California media, and that's what provided the opportunity to Marilyn Thomas, who she and Wally created the first bake shop in Apple Hill. Marilyn Thomas became the KCRA dessert chef person on Channel 3 KCRA for a long time, probably about 20 years. You know, a 5-minute segment on KCRA for every week for 20 years, we couldn't afford to do that if we had to spend that money. So the media relations approach worked very well. The group got some traction in 1965, and so in early 66, this not only is a great story, but it's also a story about hidden figures. Most of us probably seen the movie, the people behind the scenes, who really contribute, make a great contribution to whatever cause, whether it's NASA or Apple Hill. This is Clarice Larson. You know, one of the great stories of Apple Hill is not only the founding fathers, but the founding mothers like Marilyn Thomas and Clarice Larson, Joan Barsotti, Don O'Halloran, and all the gals that really made the organization possible. So Clarice Larson had read an article on from an Ohio farm newspaper. They had a dessert festival, and she said, "Gee, folks, let's give it a try." And there was a shrug at first, and Ed Delfino said, everybody looked around and said, "Well, what else are we going to do?" So charge ahead they did. So again, the environmental management people in the room have to close their ears. And this is a great illustration of the power of community. The first Smorgy was in 1966, and they anticipated a couple thousand people, and they got 4,000 or 5,000 people. And so they anticipated 5 or 6 the next year, and they got 10. So all of a sudden, they had the tiger by the tail. And what evolved was the entire community, literally from Placerville to Pollock Pines. At one time, on the left, over 100,000 people visited the Apple Smorgy, and this was in October of 1972. So 100,000 people, all looking for apple desserts, over 50,000 per weekend. They split it to 2 weekends. So without exaggeration, I remember this well, every classroom at Camino School, Pollock Pine School, down to Placerville, all the local churches, all the PTAs, every oven between Placerville and Camino was producing apple desserts for the Apple Smorgy. You probably couldn't do that nowadays. And what it did is not only it put Apple Hill on the map because of the great publicity, but it also told the growers that there is something to this bake shop thing and baked goods. So that really was the event that put that on the map, and that was Clarice Larson's proposal, her idea. So, you know, again, the power of the community, the whole community came together, and particularly for the Smorgy, Doug Kramer, Captain Kramer was the area captain on the highway patrol. Caltrans had signs out. Art Court was the El Dorado County DOT director. Eddie O, of course, helped out with all coordinating all that. So we had the county government involved, we had the state government involved, we had local schools, churches, the entire village got on board, and magic happened. And that's, that's a great part of the story, of course. So, on to 1972, when the program's established, and now I think the people who were involved in creating the program recognized that the region is worth saving. And in 1972, that was the first year that CEQA, California CEQA Act, really got some teeth for public projects. And when it says Apple Hill fights inroads of development, I think my father's quote was, it will take a firm discipline by the county officials to protect these lands. So, and Ed is, you probably can't see it, Eddie O and Dick are on the right, my dad's in the middle. So that was the first time the county really started to think about agricultural land use planning and maybe even land use planning on a larger scale. So I think we're all proud of those guys for introducing the concept of land use planning, and because of that, as Justin said, that morphed into Ed Delfino, the Ag Commissioner, and the Ag Commission, creating all of our agricultural land use protections. We went from the start of the conversation today, and thank you, Mike Rinaldi, for playing a role in this. We now have 70,000 acres in our agricultural districts in El Dorado County that are for the long-term dedicated to agriculture. So way to go, guys, and way to go, Ag Commissioner's Office and the whole team that got that done. Okay, so obviously the whole program has benefited El Dorado County from an economic development perspective. And it's interesting that in 1964, there was no such thing as an economic development agency in El Dorado County, but you had the Ag Commissioner's Office, the Farm Advisor's Office, the Board of Supervisors was involved. Ed said, Dave, you never repeat this story, but the Ag Commissioner's Office, the Secretary at the Ag Commissioner's Office for the first 3 or 4 or 5 years was the person who generated the minutes for the Apple Hill meetings and the agendas, et cetera. So nowadays we call that economic development. Back then it was just a little help from the Ag Commissioner's Office. But it really has been, when you combine the creation, the Boegers and the wine pioneers, you look at what has been created. I think DOT tells us we average about 500,000 people per year visitation in Apple Hill. Of course, the growers say it's 1 million, but it's a little less than that. But if you average how many people have come up over the years, whether that number is 200,000 or 300,000, over that 60 years, we're looking at somewhere between 20 and 30 million visitor days. And when you combine what the winery industry has done for us, the economic development benefits are incredible in terms of the contribution to our hotel industry, restaurants, gas stations. And if Lexi Boeger was here, she'd have that multiplier number. It's 7 or...
You're taking all my thunder.
Oh, sorry. Next. Okay, so it worked. Hooray. Proclamation from the Board of Supervisors of El Dorado County, and this is our 50th anniversary in 2014. Way to go, Apple Hill folks. Great job. And the last thing, I think it's the last thing, for those of us who were involved in Apple Hill from the start, we recognize the sacrifice and the hard work of all the people that made it possible. And I get a little emotional about this. You see the date, so this is right after 9/11. Anita Kramer wrote a wonderful article in the Sacramento Bee talking about Apple Hill as basically a Norman Rockwell painting. And if you read the article, she basically said, in this year of years, the best we can do is go to places like Apple Hill and wrap ourselves in Norman Rockwell's warmth, and thank you, Apple Hill. So I think it's a demonstration of what our Apple Hill program means to the people of Northern California, and it's a great testament for all those people that did that hard work to create the program. The last shout out again to Marilyn Thomas. Great job, Marilyn. Joan Barsotti, we all love Joan, great gal, we love you, Joan. Was the Channel 3 weather watcher for Apple Hill for about 15 years. And because Gail got up at 3:30 every morning, Joan had to phone in at like 4:15 to KCRA and phone in the weather. My wife took that over for about 5 years, but nice job, Joan, and all the guys. Dawn O'Halloran, those gals are the backbone of the organization. So tribute to those gals. So that's it, Pat.
Thank you, Dave. Good job. Is everybody able to hear back there? Microphones are working okay? Good. We probably are going to be running over a little bit today. We're going to take all the time we need for these presentations. We'll take a break, move the panel up here for discussion afterwards. Those of you that may have to leave, we're good in this building until about 4 o'clock, I'm told. Thanks, Dave. I couldn't help but think that all those stop-drop sprays that landed on you, the reason why an old guy like you has a good head of hair. Next up is our next up is our agricultural commissioner, Leeann Mila, and Leeann's worked in the county for many years. How many years?
Going on 25.
25 years. So she's very knowledgeable about our county and its agriculture, and she has all the facts and figures with respect to the economics of this industry. And for those of you who live in Camino or try and go up there on weekends, you know how successful Apple Hill has been. Leeann?
Hi, I'm so excited to be here to talk to you. I first of all have to say that this group, you guys get around, because last night I was at the El Dorado concert series and I saw quite a few of your faces there. And you guys were all doing the bebop and the doo-wop, and there might even be one woman here who had a love song sang to her last night. Anyways, I promised her son I'd say that. So I'm the person who's going to get us back on track. I only have 3 slides. I plagiarized them, stole them from Mike Rinaldi, our Farm Bureau president. And I'm just really going to talk about the economics of El Dorado County agriculture. I have been in the ag department. I started in the ag department, and I'm going to finish my career in the ag department. I'm super passionate about agriculture in El Dorado County. And it is roughly an $80 million a year business in our county. It is one of the biggest industries in our county. And it's one that the constituents of this county have over and over and over again, overwhelmingly put their support behind protecting. And I am, like I said, I have 3 slides. I'm going to be brief, but my door is always open at the ag department. And I love to talk about agriculture. I love to talk about what it gives back to the community, and I love to talk about the things that we have in place to protect it. I did bring mini crop reports for 2023, and I was not told how many of you were going to be here, so I only have about 20. I will have them back on that table over there. Feel free to reach out to me if you want to get one. We also have back from 1948 to the current crop report, which this is a 2023 one. On our website, and you're welcome to, you can go on and look at them and get an idea about what was going on. So this just gives you some of the trends in crops that have, this is from 2008 to 2023, and kind of crop value, how it's gone. And so this red bar at 2022, we had a hard freeze, and that hard freeze came 3 times in 2022. So grapevines have their first push that puts out their fruit, freeze, lost that fruit. We get another try, it doesn't put much fruit out, but when that one comes, freeze, we lost that fruit. And then the third push doesn't really give you any fruit, just gives you growth, boom, freeze, we lost that. We lost all of our apples, we lost all of our blueberries, and there were other multiples of crops that were lost that year. And that cut our crop pretty much in half, $40 million that year. back up to 80 this year. Of that, apples is our #1 crop in the county, $23 million crop. And one thing I want to point out is, and I explain this everywhere I go, the county ag commissioners try to talk about crop statistics, and they try to say, hey, let's compare apples. And I'm like, I can't compare your apple to my apple. Because my apple is special. So in San Joaquin County, if you sell a ton of apples, it's worth about $500, which a ton's 2,000 pounds. So you can do the math and know that that apple, it's less than $1. My apples are worth $2,300 a ton. So you can see the difference, and that's just the raw apple. That doesn't take into account when we talk about bake shop stuff. What do people come to Apple Hill for? Do you think everybody's coming up for an apple? Well, they go home with some apples, but they go home with apple pie and walking pies and apple donuts and apple ice cream and apple floats. I'm always surprised at all the apple stuff that comes up. And so of that $2,300 a ton, so we're getting to our $23 million, that's our raw crop value. That's just what comes in for freight on board. But when we look at what it brings to the county, it's roughly $300 million more that comes into the county when you look at all of the extras that are factored in because of Apple Hill. The agritourism, the people buying gas. We all know on a Sunday, I learned very quickly, do not go out. I lived off of Fort Jim, right? So I had to get onto Highway 50 to go down to my grandma down here on Missouri Flat. Don't do that at 2 o'clock on a Sunday afternoon, going that way. Don't go this way in the morning. So we know how many people come up. And that is what is bringing to our economy. They go downtown, right? I thought I could shortcut through downtown for a while. It doesn't work either. And now they're on to the back roads. You try to go Pleasant Valley, that's getting a little, anyways. Wine grapes. So wine grapes, we have about 2,800 acres of grapes. Grapes are having their own challenges right now, which is a whole nother conversation. But grapes come in, I'm getting old. I can't stay out like you guys do on a Thursday night. And then, so grapes are about $10 million crop in our county. But they bring in about 400 million with the people coming to wine taste. Apple Hill is kind of a finite time period, right? We can come wine taste all year long. And get to go, even I hear people talk about, yeah, we went away home from Tahoe, and we stopped at a couple of your wineries. Oh, we went skiing, and then we stopped at your wineries. So there's some really cool things that happen with our wine industry. Our second, anybody know what so number one's apples, grapes aren't number two. Anybody have a clue what number two is? Because it's something I don't think we talk a lot about, and they don't talk a lot about in Apple Hill. It's livestock. It's a $16 million industry. And those guys, you don't know about it because that's what livestock guys do. They're kind of quiet. They like to stay under the radar. But it is really a big industry in our county and something that we are struggling with now. How do we protect it? Our grazing lands, a lot of them are down inside the southern portion of the county or the western portion of the county. Think right next to Folsom. Development pressure is high. How do we protect them? We've been really staunch in trying to protect our ag lands, and I'll show you a little bit about that. Well, I stole this slide from, maybe it's gonna work. Oh, okay. Let me go back. Oh, maybe. It only will work for micronolly. So this just shows you trends from 2010 to 2023. And I'm supposed to have these things that come in and pop them in here, but whatever. So 2010, here's apples. And we go up and we go up and we go up and we go up and we go up. We're at about 600 acres right now. And the value. So you can see in 2022, that's when we had, I think, the only people who had apples were in Coloma. And then the other ones kind of stay, this is pears. We do have pears in the county, and I think we harvested, they're still there, but now we have apple pears and things like that that are coming in. But they're just not don't provide as much as they used to. We have 100 acres. So, livestock though, here's my livestock number. I tell you number 2, right? They like to stay under the radar. Right around here, they were like, yeah, don't talk to us. We don't want to know. Okay, wait, we'll tell you what we're really doing. But we have a big homesteading industry in this county too. We have a lot of people growing, you know, doing some more custom cut things and some a little bit more straight to producers. You can go to the farmer's market now and see you could buy meat. I didn't see that, you know, 15 years ago. Those are some new trends. The one last thing I wanted to just point on before as I try not to, as you can tell, I love to talk about agriculture. They'll tell you that, I'll just go on and on. But as I'm trying to get us back on time, ag districts. So we have some protections that we've put in place that Dave Bolster's, dad and Eddie Delfino and those guys started, and we really are still extremely committed to it. Ag districts, in an ag district, you cannot, we'll see some, you guys all know about there's weird parcels up in Camino that are really small around the big apple farms. But if you tried to subdivide your property now in that ag district up there in Camino, which is this one right here, you can only go to 20 acre minimum. You can't go any smaller than that because those are all choice soils. Those are things that we think are so valuable and need to be protected. Same with the Fairplay one. And then we expanded them out a few years back to get more land in, and there was a whole matrix for that. We have ag setbacks. So if you're next to an ag zone ag zone property, you can't build within 200 feet of that property to protect that farmer. Because I've had a lot of people over the years say, oh my gosh, I came up to Apple Hill, I want to live here. So pretty. And then the tractor comes out at 3 in the morning and they see, maybe they see some kind of mist. And then they go, oh man, we don't want that. Well, we have protections in place to protect our growers because there's things that need to happen. On a farm, you're going to have dust, you're going to have noise, you're going to have those kind of things. So with that, my doors are always open. I have many crop reports. I can always print more if anybody ever wants any. And if you have any questions, please always let me know.
Thank you, Leeann, and I can tell you that Leeann's offices, and they're right across from the UC Cooperative Extension offices, in the building that is named after Ed Delfino and Dick Bethel. And Leeann's been a real resource to this county, and thank you, Leeann, for that presentation. Next up is a guy you'll enjoy too. He's got a lot of fun stories, and many of you know him. I knew him when he was just a little guy. Now he's a tall guy. Paul Bush of Madroña Vineyards and Winery, and Rucksack Cellars, 2 of them. Whew.
Well, thank you very much. If you don't mind, I'm probably going to pace back and forth a little bit because it keeps me from being too nervous. So my job today was kind of to be a little bit of a bridge into the current and into the future. We've gotten a lot of the past explained with some great stories. You need to sit down with Dave and hear some of the other stories that he wasn't allowed to say up here. It's pretty nice. So I was asked to talk a little bit about our particular winery and its history, and then also to talk about what makes El Dorado so special for agriculture. So we're going to get into the weeds a little bit on all of the. I've never used one of these before, so you said right. But it missed one of the pictures. Okay, so let's talk about Madroña first. So we took a different approach than the Boegers did. Greg was educated in VIT and ag econ and all those types of things. My parents weren't. And if you don't know my mom, Leslie Bush, she's sitting right over there. So Mom, you can raise your hand. So my dad was he basically, he had his doctorate in metallurgical engineering from Stanford, no less. My mom's degrees were in music and early childhood development, from what I understand. And you can ask her and she can correct you later. Oh, and my brother is in the back with his wife, Sheila, and so hi, Dave and Sheila, too. Family affair. And my mom had grown up in this area in El Dorado since the 40s, and she actually was part of that pear industry, working in the pear sheds, and back when the high school calendar revolved around the pear industry and everything. Moved away, and then decided to come back, and they bought a 52-acre parcel with partners, the Brooks, and it had a 32-acre field on it. And not wanting to leave something unused, they talked to Dick Bethel and Ed Delfino. And that was going to be the first picture up here, was that one that you saw of Dick Bethel and Ed Delfino looking at another overcropped vine, but just talking together. And so they sat down with them, and everybody else was doing apples, and they said, well, you might, and this was 1972, 1973, and they said, well, what should we plant? And they said, well, maybe you could consider Christmas trees or maybe grapes. This area was famous for grapes. And if you remember Justin's slide up there, by 1972, 73, I think we were 11 acres of grapes or something in the county. And so my dad and my mom decided that they would take a look at it a little bit more. And at the time, my understanding was that poison oak was the indicator plant. If you had poison oak growing in your area, you could grow quality wine grapes. Well, poison oak grows everywhere. So they looked at it a little bit more clearly and noted that there was a plant that grew in the quality grape growing regions of California, which is Mendocino, Sonoma, the hillsides of Napa, and it also grew in a very narrow band running across the Sierra foothills. And it happens, I'm going to go forward real quickly here. No, there. It happens to be the Madrone. And the Madrone, and this is going to give you just a little bit of information about Madrones, they're very fickle where they will grow. They're non-transplantable. They only want certain kind of climate and well-drained soils. And where you find them growing is exactly the same types of things that grapes want. And so we ended up planting 32 acres of vineyards in 1973, and 74. And it wasn't until about 25 years later, when we were celebrating our 25th anniversary, I sat down with Ed Delfino, and he said, I told your parents to only plant 5 acres as a test plot, because what their concern was that it was going to be too high in elevation to actually get a crop every single year. And so they took the plunge with the madrones growing in the area. By the way, madrones aren't a tree, they are a shrub, and they're in the manzanita family. So just, they're big shrubs. So in any case, going back.
Sorry. You can only count on some certain.
Thank you, Leeann, for putting all the pictures together. I do appreciate that. So, talking to Greg, yes, on the Greg and Sue up on the balcony in the old place, and talking about where the industry was going with the McGuires and the McCrady's and everything. But our first wines were made at Boeger Winery, and there's my dad, Dick Bush, and Greg Boeger working hard at the winery. And so our 78 and 79 vintages were done there. Since then, with Dave and Sheila, we've expanded. We now have 70 acres and 2 different wineries with Rucksack, Cellars, and Madroña, and just a family picture with our kids and everything, because you have to have that in there. So this is me picking with my grandfather, Merlot, if you care, it's Merlot. So now I want to move into something a little bit different, and what makes El Dorado truly special for agriculture. And we're going to get into a couple terms that you need to know. Understand that every region is unique. Wherever you grow it, whether it's in the Central Valley or whether it's in the Sierras or in France or whatever, they're unique. But El Dorado is uniquer. So we're going to talk about 2 terms you need to know. You're going to sound pretentious when you use them, but one of them is typicity and the other one is terroir, okay? typicity are the typical characteristics that you'll find. And I'm going to use grapes here, but it's not just grapes. Typical characteristics that you'll find in a variety, regardless of where it's grown. So the example could be Merlot. Merlot, it has a kind of a cherry or plum characteristic. Doesn't matter whether you grow it in Bordeaux or if you grow it in Chile or you grow it in El Dorado. Terroir. Terroir are the typical characteristics that you'll find from the region, regardless of the variety. Does that make sense? So there's something special to each of the areas. And as we start going into the future, we're finding out that more and more and more at why we're actually doing all the agriculture in this area. So El Dorado is unique. When it comes down to it, we've got the climate, we've got the soil, and that terroir aspect, it's the climate, the soil, the exposures, everything you can explain, and all the things that you can't explain that make you special as well, okay? So the three critical aspects for El Dorado County are that we've got elevation, complex topography, and a lack of fog. So if you look at this, this is our appellation of El Dorado. Oh, by the way, when I'm using the terms terroir and typicity, I'm talking about grapes, but it works for tomatoes, it works for carrots, it works for apples. Have you ever had a Fuji apple from the store and you're like, oh, it tastes like an apple. But then you have one from one of the Apple Hill growers and it's got beautiful color to it and it's got intense flavors and everything like that. That can be the terroir, okay? It's the uniqueness of your product in the area. So, second thing you need to understand about El Dorado is, even though we think it's hot here sometimes, from a grape growing point of view, it is not that hot. So, UC Davis came up with a scale of region 1 through region 5 for growing grapes. Region 5 is Central Valley Heck. And then region 1 would be a cool climate where you probably wouldn't get full maturity on most of the varieties. Region 2, Region 3, Region 4 is where actually El Dorado fits in. So if you look at, like Region 2 is like 2,200 feet to 3,000 foot elevation. It's the black oak, the madrone, ponderosa pine, incense cedar, the Doug fir. They grow in that. The trees in the area will tell you a lot about what your climate is. So Region 3 is 1,200 feet to 2,200 feet and includes the gray pine, the live oak, ponderosa pine, okay? And poison oak, of course. And then region 4 would be chaparral, live oak, and gray pine. Now, if you look at this is the El Dorado appellation. It's a designation for quality, essentially, put through the government and has to be approved. And this was done in 1983, and Sue Boeger and Brian Fitzpatrick were integral in making sure that this happened, and we were actually declared having this appellation. But it's well defined on the lines. The upper one is the middle fork of the American. The lower one is the Consumnes on the south. This is basically a 1,200 foot elevation and a 3,500 foot elevation on the other side of it. That's where that region 2, region 3, region 4 fits. So for Madroña at 3,000 feet, we're actually like a high region 2. Basically like Dry Creek in Sonoma, okay? Whereas if you look at a little bit farther down the hill, they're more like Oakville in Napa, but we're not. The interesting thing is we can't make Napa Cabernet, but they can't make our El Dorado Cabernet either. So it's about figuring out where you fit into all of these things. So next, soils. Okay, hard to read and everything, but essentially all our soils here are some sort of decomposed volcanic aspect. We've got young decomposed volcanic soils, we've got slate, we've got granitic soils. Those are some of the best for growing grapes. They're well drained, they've got reasonable nutrients, but they're unique, okay? We also have serpentine and gabbro. Those are not so suitable for growing any sort of crop at all. So if you look forward, then I tried to overlay it. Ooh, I get to use the pointer. Okay, so this area here, you can see it's a slightly different color. That is an Aiken clay loam or Cohasset cobbly loam or Josephine, all perfect but very fertile soils for growing crops. That's where you're finding most of the Apple Hill growers. And then it also goes down into the Pleasant Valley area down in here as well. Whereas this area here with the Fairplay appellation, as well as down along here, that's all of your granitic soils. Also excellent soils for growing crops. The other main thing is we tend to have both the granitic soils as well as the Aiken clay loam and stuff, they're low pH, high acid soils. So in working with different soil scientists, if you go to Europe, they want to have calcareous soils. They want to have high pH soils because it gives mouthfeel, but their climate doesn't always provide for ultimate, maturity. We have plenty of sunshine here, so we don't need that extra mouthfeel. Instead, what we get with our low pH soils is we tend to get varietal focus and just elegance. And that balances out something very unique because we already have the ripeness on the other side of it. So, next. El Dorado County, and trust me, there's only 72 of these things. Next, we are that unique. Slope and exposure. El Dorado County has a bunch of canyons running down through it. Not only does that give us the opportunity to find different places to grow grapes, and understand that if you have things growing on the south facing or the west facing, it's much warmer. If it's north facing or east facing, then it's much cooler. So you can choose the varieties that can fit into these different aspects. The main thing about it, though, is we get great airflow through the area. So during the evenings and in the summertime, we get that downslope breeze coming out of the Sierra Nevada, cools everything down, and then during the day, it pushes back up from the Central Valley, and we get the warmth, so we get the maturity and everything. It's just perfectly ideal. Next. Elevation. What I love about this is you get to see, as a winery person, I have a hard time when people are talking about mountain grown and they're talking about an 800-foot elevation. So if you note that for us, our area over here, we're from 1,200 feet to 3,500 feet. Well, our low is about the same as a lot of their high areas. That extra elevation gives us the ability to choose what we want to plant. So those different regions at the different elevations, we can put in the warm varieties like Zinfandel and Barbera or whatever that might be in a region 4, but also be able to do Chardonnay or Pinot because we can do the region 2. And a lot of that has to do with the great elevation that we have coming up out of the Sierra. Finally, we have a unique climate here. We bud late because our winters are colder than other places. You may find that, on the coast, they may bud out in late February or early March or something like that, and we don't bud out until April. But during the summertime, we don't have a marine layer. Remember I was saying that that was one of the unique things about us? We don't have the fog that comes in. So when the sun comes up in the morning, we get immediate ripening, even though it's still cool outside, and we get ripening all day long. So our days are very long, we get that nice amount of ripening, but we started out later from the race. We budded out late. It gets us into that fall season when the days start getting shorter and shorter, the nights start getting cooler, and we get this beautiful hang time, whereas a lot of other places have already harvested in August or whatever. We just get the grapes to sit there and mature and get more complex characteristics and everything out of it. So when it comes down to it, and this part I actually read, if you didn't see that I was kind of free-forming on a lot of this. In El Dorado County, we have seemingly unlimited choices to find the perfect niche for the perfect fruit. Our county, with its soils, the climate, the exposures, the downslope cooling, the topography, the elevations, and the entrepreneurial spirit of the farmers to not just grow crop, but to produce a truly impeccable expression of the fruit that is a purely El Dorado thing. So, due to the work and the vision of the farmers in the past and the continuing commitment of the farmers today, personally, I wouldn't want to grow fruit anywhere else. I think here is where the real opportunity is, and here's where the real future is. So, thank you very much. Sorry. Quiz. Does that look like Napa? Okay. And does that look like, well, no, this was meant to show that there's a positive future even though there are challenges out there.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Paul. That was, you taking off, Justin? You gotta go?
No, not yet.
Oh, okay. Thanks very much. You know, Nancy likes to go to the store, and when she sees fruit in the store, in the market, it's beautiful. She brings it home, and I don't eat it because I'm spoiled. The fruit that is grown in El Dorado County, and this goes for the wine as well, is by far better than anything you'll get in the supermarkets, unless it comes from El Dorado County or Placer County. So I think Paul gave a lot of reasons why that is in fact the case. Now the next speaker, and our last, is Chuck Mansfield, and Charlie. Well, I could talk about him a lot. I could tell a lot of stories about Chuck. But he now, along with his mother and his wife, they are Goldbud Farms. And he's gonna talk about some technologies and about the other fruits that are grown in El Dorado County. Chuck?
Be careful, Pat. Now that I'm an adult, I've got a few stories I can get back at you with too. So. How's the volume? Everybody can hear me okay? Yeah. All right. Well, I was asked to talk about Goldbud's founding and the future for agriculture in El Dorado County. And you guys have gotten a lot of history, but I feel like the pathway forward and the founding of Goldbud is kind of intertwined with two initiatives from that same era, kind of the 70s through the 80s. One of them Pat alluded to was the IPM program, Integrated Pest Management, which is a University of California initiative. But the first one I want to talk about would be El Dorado Irrigation District's IMS program, the Irrigation Management System. Both of these programs had a common goal to get growers off of the calendar for irrigations, pesticide applications, fertilizer applications. They wanted the growers to start making science-based decisions. There were too many people that were irrigating, just a set number of hours every so often, and a lot of wasted materials, a lot of environmental impact, unnecessarily wasted. So, too much water can wilt a crop just the same as too little. So if we step back to the 70s, Dick Bethel, my dad, Ron Mansfield, Dick brought my dad onto a hiring committee for EID's new IMS program that they were envisioning. At the time, about 40% of the water use through EID's system was for agriculture. Dick wanted to improve on that number to reduce costs for the growers. He also wanted to improve quality. The irrigation district wanted to improve upon that number because the state was starting to issue more water licenses if they could document savings. So the alignment was there for a good program. The only data that was available in the area was from the Central Valley, so it wasn't really useful for growers in this area. My dad brought a tool from UC Davis with him, a new tool called a neutron probe. This is a device, you insert it into the ground, it emits neutrons, which bounce off of water molecules and come back to a sensor. So what it does is it gives you a real-time snapshot of the soil moisture at that moment. The district ended up hiring a man named Jim Costa, who still lives here today. And him and my dad would go around the county taking readings. My dad would bring the data back to the ag department and would physically type the numbers into a modem. It was connected to a computer in Denver, a Bureau of Reclamation computer. There were only a handful of computers in the country at the time. So every night he would do this. He would get the reports back, and they would basically go door to door to the growers to tell them when their next projected irrigation was going to be. EID loved it. They wanted to invest further with the goal of giving every grower a weekly report that would make a recommended date of which to apply water, and then a set number of hours, which would be tailored to their soil type and their exact crop and irrigation system that they had installed. It was a tall order. Like I said, there wasn't a lot of computing power at the time, but EID invested in an IBM machine. It was one of the early ones in California. And Jim Costa brought on a software engineer who had retired from the Defense Department, and they began working with Apple's IIe computers and started building in the other layers of computing power that were going to be necessary to make these recommendations. Ultimately, through the years and through a lot of refinement, growers now basically receive a weekly report. So you can see, you can have wine grapes, apples, any crop that you're actually growing. The district knows what type of irrigation system you have, whether it's overhead sprinklers, drippers, micro sprinklers. We use the soil maps so that it's tailored to that soil's porosity, drainage, holding capacity. And then it uses weather information and weather forecasts to give the grower these detailed reports. So just a quick walkthrough, you can see it highlighted. It'll give you the date of your next projected irrigation. It'll tell you how many hours you need to run it. And then it'll also give you the MAD, the max allowable depletion, and your actual depletion. So if you get over the max allowable depletion, that's not where you want to end up. So growers can use these tools to save water. There's my dad opening up, for sale some of his first apples. So when he got the program to a spot he thought it was going to succeed is when he kind of started hanging out his own sign, and he planted the Bing cherries at the Finati property. He was one of the first in the state to use micro sprinklers. And going to micro sprinklers, using these IMS reports, his water bill was cut in a third. The crop yields actually went up, and the profitability near doubled within 2 years. So it was highly successful. EID estimates that they were able to show somewhere between 10 and 12,000 acre feet of water savings from 1976 levels. So somewhere, I think around 15,000 acre feet of the water licenses the EID now enjoys were directly tied to this IMS program. So the second initiative that was developing at the time was the IPM program, the Integrated Pest Management Program. So back in the 70s, you had a number of retailers that were really starting to scrutinize what the growers were doing in the field. So the man on the left, his name is Gary Thielman. He still works for a company in San Francisco called Greenleaf Produce. They serve some of the country's highest end chefs and restaurants with produce. But he was one of the first produce buyers that really started taking farm tours and wanted to understand what the growers were doing in the field. Pat Weddle arrived in the late 60s, early 70s, and in El Dorado County, growers were spraying pesticides basically on a calendar interval. You know, my grandpa sprayed every 2 weeks, and my dad after him, so by golly, I'm gonna do the same thing. We were using high-risk materials, organophosphates, later neonicotinoids, high-risk materials. Resistance was growing, so the use was increasing. The cost was increasing. The environmental impacts, the worker safety impacts were all growing. Something needed to change. And IPM, among many things, one of the most valuable tools it provided was trapping mechanisms. So growers could trap insects in the field. They could get a real-time look at the actual pest populations in their field and begin to reduce some of these treatments to time them only when the pests were present and were going to cause actual environmental damage. We began rotating to newer materials, lessening that tendency for resistance to build in the pests. And I think from looking back at the records, I'd say we're probably maybe applying about 20% of the materials that we were in the early 80s, at least on Goldbud Farms acreage. So another really, really incredibly successful initiative. So the cherries, my dad started planting the cherries in 1981. We had the IMS program was really delivering a lot of valuable information. The IPM program, the techniques were really showing success. So the notoriety began to grow, traffic at Goldbud began to increase. But the trade shows, the flavor against our competitors, was really unmatched. Farmers markets, Goldbud began to be the star of the show. And by 1988, we were the daily breakfast fruit being served at the White House. We fast forward to 88 was when Whole Foods first opened up their store in Palo Alto. Originally, they had the mandate that they were just going to supply their shelves with organic certified produce, nothing else. But when they came to El Dorado County and toured some of our IPM orchards, they liked the program so much that they actually made Goldbud the main feature in their first store at Palo Alto. So through the 90s, we continued to get more and more press. The IMS program was the gold standard across the nation. IPM continued to grow worldwide. We started seeing our first setbacks probably around the 2000s. The buckskin complex started taking out the cherries. So it's that same cycle of boom and bust that El Dorado has experienced since back in the gold rush days. We were seeing it again with the cherries. So we started planting more wine grapes, pivoted away from the cherries. Oh, I'm out of slides.
Back to the kind of to help you get.
Yeah, sorry. All right, well, we'll improv the rest, but that's fine. So yeah, we moved into pretty heavily into the wine grapes, and the original stone fruit plantings started to age out. We're still dealing with that today. So as we look to the future, where do we go as an industry? I think old becomes new, new becomes old. What Goldbud's doing, we plant newer rootstocks, and we actually go around, we harvest the budwood off these old heritage orchards that still exist in our community, and we graft those onto these healthier rootstocks so that we can maintain the older selections, the higher levels of quality, continue to pack and ship that, because there's a real hunger in the marketplace for fruit and wine, but especially on the tree fruit side, there's a real hunger for products with integrity. The Central Valley is experiencing a real pinch point, even bigger than we are. The labor costs, the subsidence, the lack of water in their aquifers, climate change, consolidation, there's no more small family growers, it's all big corporate interests. They're leaving holes all over the marketplace if we can reach these consumers. Goldbud's really moved to a web-based model of reaching customers all across the US. They're willing to pay a much higher price per pound, but the quality of the product, it has to be there. And there's very few regions other than El Dorado that are able to deliver it. So, thank you.
Thank you, Chuck. That was excellent. So there you have it. I mean, I hope I hope you've heard and developed some appreciation for what a unique resource this industry is. And you've seen some of the people who are leaders, and you've heard the history. What we want to do now is we want to have a panel. We're going to take a quick break. One of the things you talked about was EID. Explain a little bit the history of why there's an I in EID.
It's a wonderful question. The original conveyance systems were mostly built by the gold miners with the purpose of getting water from the high alpine down to the gold fields. As the mining tailed off and went away, the farmers began to modernize that whole conveyance system. So if you go pre-1914, you could literally post a water right and begin diverting water and document that use, and then that was your individual water right. A lot of the farmers that were doing that began consolidating their own individual water rights along with other water rights that were inherited from the miners, consolidated those into some of the entities prior to EID that ultimately became EID. So at the time of its founding, it was pretty heavily managed by farmers, and that's why it got the name it originally had. I think total distributions, I mentioned in the 70s, EID's distributions were around 40% agriculturally metered water. Nowadays, we're down to about 15%. Some of that is a decline in planted acreage, but a lot of it is efficiencies from getting away from overhead irrigation and down to micro drip and micro sprinkler irrigation.
Thank you. Questions from the audience? Katie?
Can Paul and Charlie talk a little bit about your concerns, if you have it, about the labor situation and the pickers and so on and so forth? I mean, we read so much about that. I'd like to hear from both of you what your thoughts are.
The question has to do with agricultural labor and the problems associated with that. Thank you, Katie.
Well, I have to think first before I can talk. I try. Yeah, we're concerned. We've generally been able to find labor for our own ranch simply because we can provide a year-round job and at a living wage. And so our crew knows that if they need to work somewhere else, that they're able to do that. We're flexible with different things on it, but we generally provide a full-time job. Am I concerned? And I'll be honest, I'm concerned about the changes in the administration and some of the rhetoric coming out for deporting people and everything like that, that there will just generally be a bigger scarcity of labor. Yeah, I think that's a very big issue. I think in the long term, what it does is it drives to a lot more automation in the field. As you start looking at a piece of equipment that can, like our new electric tractor, in theory, can be programmed to be a Roomba and do the job without a driver. And so there are opportunities like that. In the long term, is that good for a community? Probably not, because you're no longer providing jobs for people and everything. But if you can't find the labor, I think that's where farmers are going to go more and more. So, yeah, it's a challenging area. Farm labor is evolving away from people that want to be full-time employees of, say, a company like Goldbud Farms. And they're consolidating around what are called farm labor contract groups, FLCs.
where it's a crew that will work for any company and kind of go where the work is. I prefer to have my own full-time year-round work, but the reality of the state is the FLC model is probably the future. The challenge becomes they operate as independent contractors, and you don't always have visibility into how well the employees are being treated or paid. You don't have full autonomy. So I think it becomes important to really work with trusted partners in that area and make sure that the farm laborers are being treated as well as possible. And I think over time, the challenges in the Central Valley, it'll bring the better labor to this area if we pay a touch more and we make sure we're treating people well. We want to just give them the motivation to choose our area to become full-time residents and not other areas of the state.
Can I add one last thing? The other thing that I think that a lot of people don't understand is that working these jobs, it's skilled labor. Knowing how to pick, knowing which leaves to remove, how to work in given situations, how to lift things up, everything that we kind of take for granted. No, this is a skill. And so I think sometimes people look down upon the workers that are doing these jobs out there, and it's not like you can just fill it with anybody that's, you know, coming out of high school or whatever. So.
Question? Carolyn?
Paul would probably be able to speak on this too, but you talked about, and I've heard this from Ron for years, about the cool nights that we have in our cool climate, cooler than the valley. So have you seen any change in that with the climate change? Do you expect to see that? I know that's a big question, but it seems to me like it's getting hotter, but you have more statistics.
So what's happening with climate change is the question.
Yeah.
Do I feel we're seeing differences? Yeah, I think traditionally when our kids were young, you know, back in the early 2000s and all the way up to maybe like 2011 or whatever, you were lucky to finish harvest by Halloween. It was all about making sure that you get everything picked by then so that you could actually go trick-or-treating with the kids, and it was a big thing. We often picked into November. November 23rd, I think, was the latest we ever picked for our vineyards. This year, we budded out extra late, yet we've had the earliest finish to our harvest ever. And that heat during the summertime, yeah, I will tell you that the color on the red wines is exceptional. They needed acid. There was some adjustments we needed to be doing. I think the quality will be good, but I am concerned that things are changing quite a bit. And you can see some of the little, like canary in the coal mine type things where there's a kind of bunch rot that's called botrytis. It makes exceptional dessert wines, which sounds like an oxymoron, but it works out amazingly well. And we used to get it every 3 years like clockwork, all the way back into the 80s. And I haven't seen it in the vineyard since 2008. And so things are changing out there. And some of it you just chalk up to weather, because we've always had little bits of weather. But like I said, one of the important aspects of El Dorado is being able, at least from the grape side of it, I can't speak for the stone fruit and anything else, but for the grape side of it, is making sure that you can get into that fall season, into September and October for your harvest, and not picking in the heat of the day, which then goes back to Katie's question about labor and being responsible and trying to get everything picked. If temperatures are just blazingly hot, it's really hard to do. So it compiles.
I think it was Chuck who coined the term that 3,000 foot elevation is the new 2,000 feet.
Kathy.
This is mostly to Paul, but you talked a lot about ecotones and, microbiomes and aspect. And so the whole time you were talking, I was thinking about vernalization requirement. So when you have grapes, varieties that are used to a certain amount of winter chill factor, how do they adjust here? Are they are they able to adapt to this area, or do you have to really fit those varieties to the?
So let me repeat the question. How do you fit varieties to changes in climate, or do the vines actually adapt in some way?
For the winter chill.
Especially with respect to winter chilling.
Chill requirements.
With-
Most plants require
Right.
a certain number of days below a certain temperature.
Yeah.
And so with our colder winters, you would think more vigor but I don't know how plastic.
So the effect of winter chilling on these vines as winter chilling changes.
I don't know how much of that is environmental,
Yeah.
how much is genetic.
Okay. How much is it? Is that a really esoteric question or what?
I'd say at our elevations, I don't think we've struggled with hitting the minimum chill hours. It hasn't
vines.
on vines, certainly. I haven't even seen it on apples or tree fruit. I know in the Central Valley, they definitely have, and it is becoming an issue on certain nut crops. But as far as the nature of the vine, I think it, when back to that drought cycle, when vines were coming out of dormancy in, say, February, the risks become much greater because you have a big long window for a freeze. You also, like you were saying, that cycle starts earlier, so harvest is now looking like early August when the temperatures are still really high, the sun angle is really high, and I think in both of our opinion, there's a deleterious quality aspect to that vintage. I don't see the vines adapting other than when they decide to wake up from winter dormancy in a given year. Yeah.
I agree on that part of it. The one thing is, as farmers, is there something that we can do? And we've adjusted our pruning schedule to adapt for the fact that there might be late season frosts that we may not have seen to the same degree before. And so we kind of, varieties that can handle cold temperatures better after they've been pruned, we'll prune earlier than other ones. So we've kind of juggled things around. The other question is how the heat and everything during, like this summer was very hot for a very, very long time, but you had to kind of prepare for it. Less leaf removal on the vines, making sure there was good shading instead of where you might traditionally have opened it up for good spray penetration and those kind of things because we farm organically. But we tried to keep more leaves this year. So there are probably things that we can do. I've always heard that you can adjust your trellising system by lifting it slightly to be able to accommodate for a 1 degree shift in temperatures or whatever. But once again, these are all costs that are going to be on the shoulders of the farmer just to adjust for something like this. And there's only so far you can actually go. One last thing. Certain things like with the climate change as a whole, my understanding is like in Germany, which is famous for Riesling and the Rheingau and that area, that within the next 10 to 15 years that Riesling will no longer, if they've been growing it for 1,200 years, but it will no longer be the variety to grow there, that they should shift to Syrah.
So I have a question for Dave, because I think this is a critical aspect of agriculture in this county as well, is the impact of development, Dave, on El Dorado County and specifically agriculture.
Well, yeah, it's significant, and I think particularly down on the west end of the county. Obviously, the west end of the county, it's more attractive to development because of the proximity to Sacramento and the job centers, and that's why we created a general plan. I say we, the citizens of El Dorado, created a general plan that focuses development west of Cameron Park and east of Cameron Park, in theory, shall remain mostly rural. And that's why we were able to create our ag districts and that 70,000 acres that's now in our ag district. But it's critical, and again, we give a shout out to our or people that came before us in terms of, Delfino created the Ag Commission in 1967. It's an advisory body to the Board of Supervisors, and sometimes they listen to us. But that enabled the county and the industry to have a platform to advocate for land use planning, and that's how we ended up with 20-acre minimum parcel sizes. So maintaining our open space, our rural open spaces, and our working landscapes. When you drive through Gold Hill, Apple Hill, Fairplay, and you drive through those areas and beautiful open landscapes of orchards, vineyards, maintaining those areas as viable agricultural areas and protecting those in terms of land use planning, it takes eternal vigilance, because the easiest thing to do in the world for a grower that has a substantial piece of land is go subdivide it. Basically, we as a county have adopted a policy that we're going to protect our ag lands, and hopefully that will continue.
Hey, Dave. Not all counties have ag commissions.
Correct. Yeah, Paul made the point that not all counties have agricultural commissions. Amador County has an agricultural advisory board, but we think ours is pretty effective because we have historically we've had proactive ag commissioners who've done a great job, including Leeann. She's gone, so she didn't hear my compliment. But the Ag Commission has played a significant role in terms of what our ag community looks like today.
Thanks, Dave. Questions? Any more questions from? Bill.
With the high cost or the high value of land currently and the decline in the grapes, do we see a particular crop that might fill in the gap?
Do we see any new crops on the horizon given some of the challenges that we learned about today?
Yeah, that has been in discussion. Given my background, I'm a long-term optimist in El Dorado Ag, and we're back at a place that we haven't been really since 1964 in terms of a significant challenge with the ag industry. It's not just the challenge in the wine industry, but it's also the inputs that we've talked about: labor, insurance, water. Water's going way up. And for example, before Chuck was elected, EID adopted a new cost of ag meters that has gone up, not double, triple, but has gone up exponentially by a factor of 12 or 13, which basically has, to a decent degree, really impaired new agricultural development. So the alternative is wells, and Bill, the Ag Commission, Leeann's going to bring in our well people and give us a little program on that. But I think new crops, I hear of new crops being mentioned, but I think it's important to remember that historically, if you look at the history of the crops in El Dorado from the wine grape, the vineyard industry, from the gold rush all the way until Prohibition, when that came to a grinding halt, that market went away. And then we had pear decline. That industry went away overnight. The timber industry, we had a robust timber industry that used to provide millions of dollars to our local school districts. That industry's gone away, and more recently, Chuck and Ron were leaders in the cherry industry, and we had a really robust 400 or 500 acre cherry industry, and because of a disease called Western X, is gone. So crops in El Dorado are very dynamic, and they can come and go. And so I think the lesson, and we look at the lessons of Apple Hill, we all, as an ag community, we have to stay nimble and be resourceful and look at options and alternatives. And the Apple Hill folks, what they created back then, that was a whole new business model. El Dorado agriculture in 1963 was 100% wholesale. All the fruit grown in El Dorado went to PFGA over on Main Street, and by rail it got shipped out of El Dorado County. What the people back then did was create an industry that's based on direct-to-consumer. In the wine industry, they call it DTC. And in El Dorado, because we're small-scale growers, it's a very good fit. What they create is a very good fit for our industry. creating value-added products. You take the raw commodity, you process it into wine or cider or baked goods. We call that value-added. So direct-to-consumer, bringing people up here to your winery or your farm and selling that product direct to the consumer is the highest return you can generate. And so they created a brand new business model and marketing channels, new markets. Nobody had ever envisioned that Sacramento would be a major marketplace for our agricultural commodities, but it is. So our industry has to stay nimble and open-minded and to be able to deal with the challenges that are coming up.
I would just like to add that what's different about right now, as opposed to some of these historical busts that we presented today, in the past, they had been acute to this area but didn't affect our competitors. What we're seeing in California now is the entirety of the industry is under the same pressures. In El Dorado County, we have the advantage of these land use protections. We have the advantage of the water conveyance systems already in place. On a lot of these ag parcels, somebody's already done the hard work of clearing the rock, clearing the trees. It's easy to put these properties back into production at a lower establishment cost than it costs our competitors in the San Joaquin Valley to remove their orchards, replace them, all while they're looking at their well having to get deeper and deeper and deeper. So the payoff horizon isn't there, and that's why you're starting to see some of the money being evacuated out of the Central Valley. So I choose to look at look at it in an optimistic way. We already have this agritourism momentum behind us. We have some of these advantages, so we can leverage all that to position ourselves in El Dorado County to catch the rebound when the greater industry in California misses.
And for my other 2 cents on that, because we had an established agritourism program, the Boegers took a tremendous risk coming from a place of 0 wineries in El Dorado, but they were located in our Apple Hill agritourism area, so that gave them a little bit of confidence that early on they were going to be able to generate traffic into their tasting room. And if you had Greg and Sue here, they would probably tell you that made a significant difference in their decision where to establish themselves. And I would think the Bushes had the same thought, that having an existing agritourism program, and like Chuck says, the momentum that we have and the infrastructure we built up in agriculture, both the physical infrastructure and the organizational infrastructure between Apple Hill and the Grape Grower Association, the Winery Association. Now, we've got a great future, but we have a little challenge to get through here for the next couple of years.
Paul, while you're at it, can you speak to the percentage of your income that comes from sales out of the winery?
So yeah, direct to consumer. So at the beginning, I was commenting to, I forget who I was talking to down here, and I was just saying that at the beginning, when we started the winery, we had no tasting room. For the first 5 years, we didn't have a tasting room at the winery because there was no reason to have a tasting room because nobody was coming tasting. And so you sold to wholesalers, you sold to distributors across the country, which was the model, but it's not a lot of good money coming in. Direct to consumer is the way to go. And so we made that decision some time ago to go predominantly direct to consumer, and we're about 85% direct to consumer. And that's the one thing that I want to piggyback onto what Dave is saying too, is we have agritourism in the area. It's not like agriculture's going away. We have to be flexible and nimble, and we might have to make some adjustments to it. But I think one of the things that will also benefit us, and going back to that idea of terroir, which is the overall value of the products, whether it's the apples or the stone fruit or the wines up here, you're getting the quality, and people will pay for quality. And I think that, once again, if you were going to plant a vineyard or start a winery, this might be the time to do it, because once things pull out, you would be then in the production phase and everything. And I think people will be finding more and more that El Dorado is producing above average quality for the price compared to many of the other areas of California.
Last thought on that, Paul, is that we have, you got the preacher going. We have, in terms of competitive advantages, because of the nature of our area, we live in this beautiful area. The theme of the original founders of Apple Hill was it was a family day in the country. They weren't focused on product sales, value-added product sales. They were focused on experience. As we all know, if you give somebody a great experience, they come back. And as you drive up Carson Road, the first thing you see from Snell School is a beautiful Boeger Vineyard. It's beautiful. Then you drive up top of Carson Road, the views, etc., farms, vineyards, and I think fall colors. And I think we have a tremendous competitive advantage, both on the farm side, the winery side. Would you rather come up to beautiful Apple Hill and go wine tasting or go to Lodi? I know that answer. So we have great competitive advantages, and so I think for that reason, I think we've got a great future.
We had a question over here.
Yes. Speaking of water conveyance systems, how much of EID's kind of conveyance from the High Sierras date before World War II because of canals and the ditches and all that? And is that what EID is trying to sustain that, replace it, or improve it?
How much of the EID water conveyance is
Getting the water from down above here down through the foothills and further?
Yeah.
I understand.
So the question is the ways of conveyance, that the infrastructure of conveyance. Correct?
Yeah, I don't know, Paul. On our tours, it didn't look like a lot of it was very modern, did it?
Vintage.
Yeah. Yeah, I'd say, without having all my notes and projects in front of me, I think a significant, you look at Echo Lake, I think that was all pre-war. I think Silver Lake, Caples Lake, pretty much everything, the dams, all that looked to me to be pre-war with maybe some refurbishments along the way. But what Silver Lake Dam was the one that was made out of timber and packed earth, right, encased in gunite. And so that's one of the big projects upcoming. I think Sly Park Lake, Lake Jenkinson is post-war. EID acquired that much later. That's 30,000 acre feet and is really the linchpin of the modern system. So some of that stuff is actually in really good shape still, but there's significant portions of it that are on the capital improvement plan, and many of those are projects that are in the tens of millions upcoming.
So are we going to build more dams?
There's no plans to build more. There's the Alder Creek project that's under study. So that there are options when you look at the 40, 50, 100-year plan out in the future. But EID's focus in the near term is just rebuilding the infrastructure to be safe, reliable, and sustainable for the decades to come.
Why don't we just build more dams?
Well, who's going to pay for them?
Exactly.
If you're going to ask the ratepayers to shoulder that cost, it's cost prohibitive. There's the environmental downstream effects. There are some attractive environmental reasons to look at Alder Creek project in particular, but EID does not have a shortage of water. The district can expect around 70,000 acre feet of water in a typical water year, and system-wide demand all in El Dorado Hills, agriculture, all customers is usually a little bit north of 35,000 acre feet, not usually over 40,000 acre feet. So there's a substantial surplus of consumptive water rights, and EID is able to usually monetize some of that extra water each year.
You go down to the Southern Valley and you'll see signs that they want more dams built. But farmers can only pay so much for money, and the cost of those dams exceeds the cost of the water that would be developed exceeds the ability of those farmers to buy that water. So more dams aren't necessarily the answer to this dilemma.
So we're talking about El Dorado water development, the history of water development. We should never, never, never miss the opportunity to thank the great Dick Aiken. Dick was a retired airline pilot and grape grower out in Gold Hill, as most of us know who have know the history. Governor Davis in the late 90s was forcing California utilities to divest themselves of projects. They were big monopolies, et cetera, so he was forcing them to break themselves up to some degree. And fortuitously, we had the great floods of 1998 that wiped out the PG&E powerhouse up on the American River below Pollock Pines. And PG&E, I think the bill was $17 or $18 million to rebuild the powerhouse. And PG&E did the math and said it doesn't make sense to spend $18 million when the governor's forcing us to sell that project. And so PG&E was going to sell the project, and Project 184 was Lake Aloha, Echo Lake, Caples Lake, Silver Lake, and the forebay at Pollock Pines. Thanks to Dick Aiken's advocacy and bulldog nature, he encouraged the district to pursue that, and whoever was really there at the time, somebody probably was. I believe we bought Project 184 for $1, and we had to spend the 17 to rehab the powerhouse, which today in good years, what, $5-6 million in power revenue. So it was a pretty good deal. And without Dick Aiken, where would we be in terms of water supply in El Dorado? So thank you, Dick.
Mark?
Has there been in the informal or formal collaboration between Wine Association and Apple Hill and Stone Fruit for marketing?
Are there formal or informal relations between Apple Hill and El Dorado Wine Growers Association and Grape Growers Association? Or is it just kind of a collaborative enterprise that y'all get along?
So that's a great question, and that's something that I think, given the current status of the industry, we're going to have to look at. And if Mike Rinaldi's still here, we're looking at creating an organization to pursue USDA grant funding, value-added grant funding, and it's a perfect source of funds for us because all we do in El Dorado is value-added products. Amador County just recently passed what they call a TBID, Tourism Business Improvement District. The Amador Vintners Association created this district with the cooperation of their Board of Supervisors because it's a collaborative, self-funding, self-assessment program where they assess themselves 50 cents a case of wine, whatever it might be, and that goes to Amador County and it's redistributed to their association for marketing. It has to be exclusively marketing, and they recognize, given the challenge right now in the wine world, that they better get organized and cooperatively promote themselves. And that's a great question, and it's something on the list that we're all going to have to talk about, Mike.
There's another thing with the improvement of the wall along Highway 50 all the way up. It had some impacts on our area for the Apple Hill growers and the businesses, the ag businesses and everything in the area. Caltrans had some funding put forward to work with a consulting company to figure out a better wayfinding program. Wayfinding being directional signs for the area. And that would be inclusive. It wouldn't just be the Apple Hill growers or the Winery Association, because currently you see Apple Hill signs directing in locations or winery signs directing in locations. But from a wayfinding point of view, if you have 20 signs on a stick, nobody sees anything. And so have continuity throughout the area and trialing something out. It'll take a while, but trialing something out in the Camino Fruit Ridge area in order to get people to ranches more easily.
I think Mike Rinaldi may have something he'd like to add to this.
I wanted to take a shot at something that crosses the first question that I think was about the climate forecast, the crop mix, and the viability of the crop mix given that climate environment and development pressures. I want to try to connect those three. The Federal Bureau of Reclamation and the State Water Board with regional water agencies in 2014 did the American River Basin Study. That basin study forecasted a 4-degree rise in winter temperatures and 7-degree rise in summer temperatures. Now, you know, I'm not a meteorologist, but I think the message there is to plan for greater extremes, weather extremes, and plan for longer periods of drought. Now, the connection with the crop mix is there's some that believe that many of the crops that are currently viable in the Central Valley will likely move up to higher elevations. That's a possibility. And the last one was about development pressures. Most of the land holdings for the developers are on the west side of our county. But if those climate forecasts continue to evolve, I would expect that they may want to move up to higher elevations as well. And that will bring a different development pressure than we've seen in the past. So we need to make sure we protect those agricultural districts that have the important soils. We need to make sure that we plan for the water for the future. And we need to be flexible in how we adapt, as we've seen from the predecessors, our predecessors.
So Mike is the president of the El Dorado County Farm Bureau. Thank you, Mike.
Can I comment on that? You know, we've grown wine grapes for 30 plus years now. And I've used EID water, and I've kept a very careful tab on the amount of water used and when it was used. And I have neutron probes and tensiometers that measure water, the amount of water used, so it's a pretty accurate measure. And over those 30 years, I've seen the season get later and later and later for harvest by at least a week plus. So to me, it seems like we're harvesting the same crop, same grape, over 30-year period. So there's been, from my perspective, at least a week's difference in harvest. Now that may continue beyond what I see at this point if we don't deal with this climate change situation. Now that affects the quality of the grapes and to some degree the amount of quantity and quality you get. But others must be seeing this as well.
Yep. And Randy Hansen and I, over the years, have followed the same kinds of temperature data as it relates to insect development, pest insect development, and we've seen shifts that have allowed for additional generations of these pests to occur during the growing seasons, which puts more pressure on the crop protection aspects of it. And some of those data go back almost 100 years.
So, following up on Mike's migration comment about climate change, so Mike and I work with a gentleman up at Salt Lake Tahoe. He has a marketing firm, Carl Robato. He's now the chair of our new economic development organization, El Dorado. So I've known Carl for years, and we have conversations about tourism. He's a marketing guy. And so we had a conversation this last fall about Apple Hill traffic, et cetera, and dealing with that. And I said, well, how did the summer go at Tahoe? And he said, Dave, we are getting crushed by climate change refugees. When it's 92 at Tahoe, it's 112 in Sacramento, and where do you think all those people are going? So Tahoe's getting crushed by it as well.
Did you have something, Paul?
No. Actually, I do have one thing.
Okay.
Sorry.
And then John. All right.
Just a quick question relating to climate change and crop changes. Do you notice a change in movement to other crops like olives, for instance, that tolerate temperature changes and water use a little bit better than some of the others? Is there an increase in that in the county?
Is there a change in production of crops like olives as a result of a climate change, the possibility of climate change? Did you get all those olives harvested, by the way?
Yeah.
Okay, good. All right.
This is where we would need Leeann because she has more visibility into emerging crops. I think as a business operator, I more try to adapt my practices to meet the moment with my particular crops that I already have a developed market for. But observationally, there are some people putting in olives. I noticed there's more people that are interested in growing vegetables and row crops. I think the common trend is more that El Dorado is a place for experimentation because there are smaller parcels that are zoned agriculture that are affordable. In Napa at $200,000, $300,000, $400,000 per acre, nobody's going to acquire that land and take a flyer on some sort of emerging crop. You're going to just put in Cabernet because that's all there's a market for in that area at those dollar amounts. But that monocropping and that consolidation to core varieties, it creates risk. A lack of diversity creates risk when a given pest, or whether it be climate change or market dynamics, when we saw it firsthand with the Bartletts when we got too heavily monocropped into one particular commodity. When that pest hits you, it knocks you all the way out. So while El Dorado County's diversity may make our agricultural sector seem a little bit schizophrenic at the moment, that diversity can actually be our golden shield because we have momentum in various areas and we can see which commodity is going to be the successful one for the future and pivot towards that more heavily. We can make that change quicker.
Strength and diversity. I know we have an agave planting in the county now. And I've seen some big ones down in the southern part of the state.
So one of the difficulties, I think, is we're all small businesses. And even though you can see, are we billionaires or millionaires? I can't remember which one it is. Farming really isn't, it's thousandaires, right? You do it because you're passionate about it. It's exciting in its way and everything. But you take 2021, which was the Caldor fire and the smoke damage certainly for the grape crop. And then 2022, back-to-back losses where we've lost 70% of the crop. Had we had a third year like that, and we're blessed, we have an inventory, we can spread it out a little bit so that the damage doesn't all come at one time and everything. But you start getting enough of those years in a row, and those are climate change oriented things. It's difficult for a farmer to say, I want to switch over into an entirely new crop that's going to take 16 or whatever years, 6 years to get a full crop out of and everything, when if you look at the average age, there's whippersnappers, but some of us are old. And it's difficult to make those kind of changes, and I think you might find that you're going to see more attrition where a grower says, I don't need to keep doing this, and they decide to pull the crop out and not put something else in. And so I have concerns about that part of it.
Okay, I think we probably have time for one more question if anybody's interested. We do have to be out of here by 4. When we do conclude, if you can, I think we want to get the chairs stacked back on the table, and it'll take us a while to get out of here. So why don't we take one more question? Does anybody? Okay.
I'll direct it to Charlie. If I came to you and I had 20 acres bare land, said I want to plant something, what would you recommend?
Don wants to know what Charlie would recommend to plant if he had 20 acres that he wanted to plant into something. Agave?
I'd tell you don't plant Zinfandel. No, we're still having success with stone fruit. I see a lot of struggles in and around Fresno where there's a concentration of stone fruit. The labor, the water, the expense of pumping it from deeper and deeper in the aquifer. To me, I think that's one of our ways forward. The challenge is the not having a large packer shipper anymore with fruit growers. So meeting that wholesale market is getting more and more difficult in California. Goldbud is pivoting to a direct-to-consumer relationship, not only through the agritourism, but through web sales, internet sales. So I think that's a growing area. Is it going to grow fast enough to replace all the wine grapes that need to come out in our county? That's the challenging spot we find ourselves, is how much attrition is there going to be, and how quickly can we replace that or find new emerging crops like the agave. There's pawpaws, these vegetable row crop growers that are moving into the area. Is that going to be 5-6 years before we find what's successful, or are we going to stumble upon the next solution quicker? But as far as Goldbud's concerned, we're getting a little heavier back into the peaches and nectarines, and hedging back from the wine grapes.
And farming hemp and cannabis is a whole nother story for another day. Well, I hope, I want to thank Sierra Renaissance Society for the opportunity to do this. And this program has been recorded and is available on the Sierra Renaissance Society webpage as a YouTube video, I believe.
It will be.
It will be, yes. Thank you, Bill. And I want to thank our panelists. I hope you understand what the challenges that these folks face and how innovative and adaptive they are to make El Dorado County agriculture the truly unique industry that it is. And thank you all for your attendance today.